Hello and welcome. Bruce Fulton here, School of Information, University of Arizona. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to install Ubuntu Long-Term Edition, version 20.04 in VMware Workstation Pro. That's a virtual machine. So you'll actually be running Ubuntu Desktop as a virtual machine on your Windows desktop. You're going to need a couple of things to get started. First of all, you're going to need the application VMware Workstation Pro. As I record this, we're currently at version 15.5. You can get a free trial. It's going to be a 30-day trial. You can experiment with this, get it running, see how you like it. If you decide to buy it, you can get a license for that and fully activate your trial version. If you happen to be a student at a university, something or other like that, be aware that there is a pretty significant academic discount for that, so you're going to want to take a look at that. In order to get that, simply visit the URL that I've got here, download the trial, and you'll get a temporary code that will allow you to get that going. The second thing you're going to want to do is visit ubuntu.com to download the desktop ISO. And ISO is a type of file that is an image of a CD. You don't actually need the CD. You don't need a CD player. VMware is going to be able to take that file and use that to install the virtual machine without actually having to burn a CD or use it. And let's take a look now at the system requirements before we get to the download. These are the system requirements if you're going to download and install this on an actual desktop machine. They'd like a 2 gigahertz dual-core processor, 4 gigabytes of RAM. Now what that actually means is they'd like to have about 6 gigabytes on your system, since you need to run both the virtual software as well as the desktop operating system in the virtual machine. You're going to need about 25 gigabytes of hard drive space. You can also install this on an external flash drive, USB stick, or external hard drive. You're going to need a minimum of 1024 by 768 screen resolution, but I would recommend more than that if you have it. They suggest a CD, DVD drive, or USB port, but of course, as I just mentioned, we just need the ISO file. You don't actually need a CD or a DVD drive. And finally, they suggest that internet access is helpful. I would suggest that it's almost critically necessary, because when you run the install, the installation routine is going to go out and grab a bunch of updates, and it really is difficult to do the installation without being able to go out and grab those updates. It's possible, but you're going to want to be connected to the internet when you do this installation. So having gotten those preliminaries out of the way, let's go back to the ubuntu.com website. We'll go to the download page here. You can see that we're going to want to get the long-term supported edition. Ubuntu does have intermediate updates available. 2.04, 20.04 is the current long-term supported edition. If for some reason you need to go back and get 1804, which is the prior long-term supported edition, you can find that here under older releases. And we can open that link in a new tab. I'll show you what that looks like. These are the older releases that are available going back as far as 12.04. I would recommend you don't go back farther than 1804. 1804 reintroduces what's called the GNOME desktop. Prior to 1804, they were on Unity desktop. 1804 reintroduces the GNOME desktop, and that's what they're going to be going with from here on forward. The differences between 1804 and 20.04 are small. 20.04 introduces some improvements, some speed improvements, and so on. There aren't otherwise too many differences between the two. If for some reason you need to go back to 1804, you can download that. But I'm going to recommend that we go with 20.04 for now. So go ahead and click this. That will open up a download window, and you can download that. I'm going to cancel out. I already have this. You'll note here that they ask you a few questions, offer you an opportunity to contribute to the project. It's a worthwhile project if you feel like doing that, but you're certainly not obligated to. So now that we have those two files that we need, you need to install the VMware software. I won't go through that. It's a pretty standard installation to get the VMware software installed. So we can go ahead and start the installation routine to get the Ubuntu Desktop installed as a virtual machine in VMware. So let's take a look and see what that looks like. There are a couple of ways that we can create a new virtual machine. They're both identical. You can either click this icon here to create a new virtual machine. We can also go File, New Virtual Machine. Doesn't really make any difference either way. And we are presented with the welcome to the new virtual machine wizard. Now, when we do a server, and I have some videos on installing VMware Server as a virtual machine on the desktop, we go through a custom installation routine, and there are a couple of reasons we do that, as I explained in those videos. For desktop, we can go ahead and use the Easy Installation Wizard. Isn't any reason that we need to go through a custom installation for desktop. And so we start out by making sure that Typical is selected on the first screen. We can go ahead and click Next. And here's where the difference between server and desktop, as I recommend you install it, lies. For server, we check I'll install the operating system later. For desktop, I recommend going ahead and starting with the installer disk image file. So make sure that's checked, and then you need to browse to where you downloaded the ISO file and select it. So I've got mine here. We want the Ubuntu 20.04 desktop AMD ISO file. You'll notice as I've got some of these other files here, there may also be a revision number as I'm working with a 20.04 edition. We don't have one yet. You'll note that my version of 18.04 does have a 0.4 revision. For right now, we're going to go ahead and use the 20.04. Go ahead and click Open, and then make sure that this operating system will use Easy Install. That should pop up automatically. So go ahead and click Next. Now we're presented with the opportunity to go ahead and enter the full name and username that the system will install as the what we call the sudo or administrative user. When you do this, there's no reason on an experimental system on your desktop to try to get too heavy into security. I recommend you use something simple. I'm going to go with user1 for both full name and username. I'm going to go with password. What I do recommend is that you choose something simple. If you choose something more complicated, or even if you choose something simple, be sure to write it down and make sure that you do it accurately. If you get to the point where you've got everything installed and you forget it or you've written it down incorrectly, honestly, it's going to be easier just to reinstall the system and do it over again than to try to recover it. So once you've got that entered, you can click Next. Now it comes to virtual machine name. You're going to want to enter a name for your system, the virtual machine name. Here again, I recommend you do something simple. I'm going to choose Ubuntu B2004D for desktop. This is going to be a machine name, so I'm going to recommend that you avoid spaces, that you avoid fancy characters, that you choose something simple. You can see here that it's also creating a location on your computer for this virtual machine. If you use spaces, if you use fancy characters or something, that's going to create problems. If you don't like the location that it's choosing, it usually chooses a default directory for your virtual machine directory. You can browse if you want to choose someplace else, or if you want to put it on an external drive or a flash drive or something. So browse here if you want to do that. If you're fine with this directory, then you can leave it alone. Go ahead and click Next. Now, you have some choices to make here. The maximum disk size defaults to 20 gigabytes, and you should think about that. That's as large as your virtual machine will become on your host system's hard drive. And that's usually plenty for experimenting. If you think you might need it bigger, and that would be, for example, if you plan on, say, putting a lot of video files, for example, on this drive, then you can select something here, but that is a maximum size that the virtual machine can get. So I wouldn't make it smaller. I'd go ahead and leave the default. The second choice you need to make is whether to store the virtual disk as a single file or to split the virtual disk into multiple files. There's a slight performance advantage into storing the virtual disk as a single file. The advantage to splitting the virtual disk into multiple files is it makes it easier to move it from one place to another. And further, if you're going to put it on a flash drive or think you may need to transfer it to a flash drive, you really do need to split the virtual disk into multiple files, because the operating system, or the way the disk is partitioned on a flash drive, will preclude it from being placed in one large file on a flash drive. So if you think you might do that, it's safer to leave it split virtual disk into multiple files is the option here. So clicking Next, this brings you to the summary screen of the options it's going to make. In general, you don't need to do anything at this point. The only thing you might want to do is perhaps bump up this memory. You remember that the minimum memory recommended is 4 gigabytes. This will default to 2. It will work there. It may not work very well. You can change this later. It will get you through the installation or customize hardware, and that will get you to a point where you could bump this slider up to 4 gigabytes if you wanted to. Let's see, 4096. So you could bump it up at this point. But as I say, you can leave this alone. It'll get you through the installation, and you can see whether you might need to bump up later, depending on the performance issues. When you click Finish, the installation will start, and it will take off on its own. The installation is hands-off at this point. Let me readjust this so you can see what's going on according to my installation window. Now, let me mention one thing. This is a hands-off installation. You don't need to do anything. But this is a live terminal window, and it would be possible to click into this and enter something. I don't know why you would want to do this, but that will capture your mouse cursor. If you would happen to do this, you can check down here in the bottom left, and you will occasionally see the instruction that to recapture your mouse. If you press the Control and the Alt keys together, that'll get your mouse back out so you can let the installation continue. Now, you may want to watch this screen. It will give you some instructions, some commentary, explain a few things as it goes along. So you may want to watch this, and you can learn a few things about this installation. I'm going to pause this video, this process, because it does go out on the internet, grab a few updates. apply some things, get some new files, can take perhaps a half an hour or more. So I'm going to pause the video and come back when the installation is complete, and then show you just a few things about the new Ubuntu Desktop. All right, the installation has completed and we're ready to log in for the first time. We need to select the user and enter the password. Now we're offered a number of options. This will depend exactly on which version we get. We can connect our online accounts. Obviously, I'm going to skip that for now. We can set up live patch. That keeps the computer secure by applying some updates that would normally require restarting. I'm going to skip that, but you can do that if you choose. We can help improve Ubuntu. That includes sharing some information with Ubuntu by sending system information to Canonical. I'm going to skip that. Privacy allows applications to determine your geographical location. I'm going to skip that, not turn on location services. And now it says that we're ready to go, and you can take a look at that. I'm going to briefly go over a few options here. I'm not going to spend a great deal of time right now explaining the desktop, but as soon as I'm done with this, I'm also going to show you where you can find the Ubuntu documentation that's going to do a great job of explaining things. You will be hit with Software Updater almost immediately at some point. I'm also going to skip that, but it's a good idea to run that. No matter what it did during installation, there's also going to be software that needs to be updated. So you should run that at your earliest convenience when you see that going. So let's take a look. I'm going to click select this and click Remind Me Later on the Software Updater. To begin with, your favorites bar is on the left. This corresponds to your selection bar on the Macintosh, which usually runs along the bottom, or your favorites on the current Windows machines, which also usually runs across the bottom. You can move this from one side to another, configure that. You can add things or remove things from this by removing from favorites. You can also take a look at what software is installed here by checking your installed applications. There's one I'd like to bring to your attention right away, which is Terminal. More so than the Macintosh, and definitely more so than Windows, more needs to be done at the command line in Linux, even with the desktop. And so I would go ahead and pin Terminal to favorites. That moves it here on the favorites. You can do that with any of these, of course, just by right-clicking on it and then clicking Add to Favorites. Briefly, Terminal allows you to add things at the command line, for example, to get a directory list of the files. You can type in ls. I'll come back to that in a minute. Other applications here, is a file list. This is like Windows Explorer, or Finder in Macintosh. Comes with the Firefox web browser, Thunderbird Mail, the LibreOffice suite. This is Writer. It comes, and this is Microsoft file format compatible. It also comes with a spreadsheet and some other applications that are compatible with the Microsoft applications. Software. We can take a look at this. This is similar to the Windows or Apple Play Store, where you can add and remove programs. We'll wait for, it takes a second for that to load. One other application that's going to be important for you to become familiar with is the Settings application. I'm going to go ahead and add that to favorites and then show that to you. That's similar to settings for the Macintosh or the Windows as well. Displays is something you might want to take a look at. This is where you can set your resolution. Orientation you probably don't want to mess around with. You can take a look at fractional scaling and see what that is. But because you're working in a virtual machine, you may not be using the entire area of your screen. So this may be something that you want to take a look at and see what the different resolutions are that make sense for your monitor and how you're using the virtual machine. So be aware of that. Let me also show you some tools that you can use to adjust the real estate as you're working with desktop in a virtual machine. Up here are how you can adjust the window that you're looking at. So, and this is from the standpoint of VM, not necessarily the virtual machine. You can take a look at the library display over here and turn that on or off, and then adjust your virtual machine accordingly. So this displays the panel at the left. This displays turns on or off the panel at the bottom, so you can see which virtual machines you have running. You can turn that on or off. This one enters full screen mode, so you can adjust the virtual machine so that it does take up your entire desktop display. I'm not going to demonstrate that because of the window that I'm recording in, but when you do that, this tab here that shows the virtual machine, the VMware menu, and these controls rolls up, and to get it back so that you can get your VMware menu back, when you move the cursor to the top, it'll roll back down. So it rolls up and down when you're in full screen mode. I think that's probably all I'm going to cover with the desktop by now. As soon as we're finished closing that out, I will show you where the documentation is. There's one more VMware feature that I want to mention, which is in VM here. This is the snapshot function. You can take a snapshot. This is basically doing a backup of your virtual machine. So you can take a snapshot, you can label it, and it will make a copy of your virtual machine. Now that does take up a lot of room, so you can take snapshots as you go along, but then that does take up disk space. So if you're going to do that, after you get a couple of snapshots, you might start deleting the older snapshots that you no longer need. Let me show you a couple of different ways that you can close out the virtual machine. The first is with the power option here. When you drop this down, you can power off or log out much as you can on Windows and Mac, and that will turn the machine off, so we can go ahead and power off the virtual machine. We can restart or power off or cancel, so let me power that out, and that will turn the virtual machine off. Let me show you another way. I can power it back on here now that it's turned off. Let me explain this message. Cannot connect a virtual device SATA 0 because no corresponding device is available on the host. That looks like an error message, but it's really not. It's saying that it can't connect that device SATA 01, and that's because I don't have a SATA drive in this computer, so it's not an error. It's not an error. There's no reason to try to reconnect because I'm not going to have that device and never will. So it's just an information message, and I don't want to try to reconnect every time I restart the machine. So the answer to this is no. Another message you may get is that turning on the virtual machine may recognize USB devices that you can connect to the virtual machine, and it may offer to let you do that. That would be cameras, external drives, and so on. Keep in mind that if you do connect them to the virtual machine, they're not available to your host computer. So if you get that message, you can decide whether you want to connect those devices to the virtual machine or whether you want to leave them connected to your host. I'm going to click no here. and then the virtual machine will reconnect, and I will resize that to the area of my recording window. All right, I'm logged in. Let me explain the other method you can use to shut down the virtual machine, and that is through VMware. If you look up here with the pause, a couple of options. I can shut down the guest. I would recommend you not actually shut it down using this option unless there's a problem with the virtual machine, if it's locked up or something or other like that. The virtual machine might be doing something in the background, and if you shut it down using this function here, there's a chance that you could corrupt the virtual machine. So unless there's some kind of problem and you need to shut it down, I would not recommend that. But there is a suspend function. Let me show you how that works. If I were to go to all applications here, let's go to the spreadsheet application, for example. And I'll just make a couple of entries in the spreadsheet here just to show that we've got a spreadsheet application going. And now we're in the middle of this spreadsheet. What I can do is suspend the guest, which is our virtual machine. And when I suspend it, it puts it in a state of suspended animation, so it preserves the state. This is very useful, so you don't have to shut down the machine. And when you resume the virtual machine, it restores it in exactly the state that it was when you shut it down. So that's a useful function, an alternative way that you can use VMware. So I think that's about all that I want to discuss as far as the GNOME desktop. Let me bring back our website here and go through the documentation here. The documentation, if you go to the main site here and go to community, here's where you can find the Ubuntu documentation page. And you'll get to this site. You can click on the HTML version of this. And this is the Ubuntu Desktop Guide. And so there are several sections of this that go into the documentation. So for getting started with GNOME, for example, there are videos that they have on launch applications, switching tasks, using Windows and workspaces, browsing the web, launching applications, and so on. So these will give you much more comprehensive descriptions than I can in a few minutes on using this new GNOME desktop. So I would recommend that you go there. And of course, YouTube is your friend. There are all kinds of videos from all kinds of really great presenters on using that desktop. I just wanted to show you a few things to get started, including how to shut down and how to launch a few applications. So I hope this has been helpful for you. It's just a taste of what there is. The important thing to do is to remember to experiment. If you take snapshots, you really can't hurt anything. There's certainly nothing you can do in the virtual machine that will hurt your host computer. So don't be afraid to try things. If you get stuck, post into the community forums. Lots of help out there. Ubuntu is one of the friendliest communities I've ever run into. Lots of people will be wanting to give you help. So thank you very much for watching, and good luck. Thank you.